Hi, everybody. It's Meg Owens with ICEA here with you for one of our Tech Showcase webinars. This one brought to you by Palisade, and it's part of a three-part series where we're going to get deep into some of the features of the at-risk software. Our presenter today is Dr. Steve Van Drew, and Steve's going to be doing things a little differently than we do for some other webinars if you've attended. He'll be asking periodically throughout the webinar if you have any questions, and we'll pause and take questions as we go. So if you come up with a question, go ahead and ask it in the questions box, and we'll get to you in order that they were asked. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to Dr. Steve Van Drew.
Thank you. Hey, you answered one of my questions right off the bat. I've always wondered how to pronounce ICEAA. I mistakenly say IKEA and get a lot of giggles when I'm talking to people, and I know that can't be right. So hearing it from the executive director herself, it's ICEA. Got it.
I like to joke with people that it's I see you $5 and I raise you 10.
No Swedish meatballs either, right?
Right. Yeah.
So we've got a small audience today, so that especially makes it easy to jump in and out and answer your questions. I don't want anybody to have to wait too long to get an itch scratched, so to speak. And before we even came on, there was already one question, and I'll go ahead and answer it for the benefit of everybody. Yes, I'm retired. Isn't this how everyone spends their retirement, doing webinars? The truth is, I still feel young enough to be earning a little bit of money to go with my retirement check. I am one of you, and if you don't recognize my name, I'd understand, but I have been around the cost estimating community for at least 25 years. I was a member of SCIA. I don't think I ever joined when it changed over to ICEA, but as a member of SCIA, I even was the president of what was then the Southern Maryland chapter. For a period of time, I was in Southern Maryland working for Univariate. I was there 18 years. I do not work for them anymore. I really don't even work for Palisade. I'm just a private consultant and trainer for them. But they are the ones who are paying for the airtime for this presentation. So that's why you're going to see a lot of their logo. In fact, what I want to show you next is their website, so you'll know what they hope to be getting out of this presentation. It won't let me leave. There we go. So very simple website to remember, palisade.com. And right on their screen, their opening screen, you'll see in green up in the right corner, free trials. That's what I want to encourage any of you who are not familiar with at-risk, or those maybe that tried it before and wonder what it's like these days. If you're not a user, there is a new version of at-risk, version 8.0 now. And so if you go to free trials, you'll notice that you get 15 days after installation to play with the industrial, the full strength version of at-risk, or you can jump in and go ahead and download the entire decision tools suite, which includes at-risk, the add-in to Excel. It also has a software add-in, a statistics add-in. There's a decision analysis and optimization, a sensitivity analysis, and even a neural network one if you're interested in that. But why not give it a try? 15 days, doesn't cost you anything, it's free. So that's the paid political announcement, and I will kind of leave it at that. The presentation that I'm going to be giving today, I'll be jumping back and forth between PowerPoint, that I have some slides I will be shooting through ICEA that hopefully will get passed on to those of you that have attended, as well as one Excel file that I'm going to do all my work in. More so than some of my other webinars that I do, I'm going to spend a few more minutes on some slides, some theoretical side of the presentation. And I'm doing that because this, it's one thing for you just to learn how to click the buttons and things like that, but especially in this very important part of cost, risk, and uncertainty analysis, using univariate data to determine what probability to distribution to use to model a random variable. There's a lot of mathematical underpinnings here that I think it's important for you to understand. And I know that not all of you that are attending are even at-risk users, So if you're Crystal Ball, if you're an ACIT and COSTAT user, if you're using TruePlan, any of the other products that are out there, you know, that's your call. I'm not here to try and convince you to switch, although I really would encourage you to give it a test run, as I showed you a moment ago. But regardless of what stats software you're using to determine what distribution to use when you have data, these things all apply until I get to the mechanics of using at-risk itself. So I want to spend a few minutes doing that. I think even the non-at-risk users will get something out of it. Where we are in the overall modeling process is I imagine if you're an Excel user, and not all of you are, but if you're an Excel user building your cost estimate in Excel, then the minute you start to acknowledge that there are risks and uncertainties present in the estimate, you're going to need distributions to describe the risk and uncertainty. If you have data available to do that, then you're at this point in the overall process of modeling cost, risk, and uncertainty. So that's what we're talking about here, is I have univariate data present. I need to use that to determine for me what probability distribution to use to plug into the model, to model labor rate, to model you know, any of those univariate pieces of information you're modeling for a random variable with. Okay. While we're on it, and I imagine, Megan, that this is available to you at the ICEA website as well, but just so you've heard it up front, this is part of their technology showcase webinar series. I'm not here to present an academic paper or anything. I'm here at Palisade's encouragement to switch you over to at-risk, to get you to see what at-risk is capable of. And they're paying for 3 different parts of this, and you see the dates here. First one's today. Next month on the 17th, there will be another part to this input distribution selection focusing on the triangular and PERT distributions, very popular distributions for cost estimators. And then the third part of this in August on the 14th will be about turning expert opinion into a distribution that you can defend. How to ask questions, how to take the answers to those questions and use some math to help you determine what the appropriate distribution is to use for subjective probability assessment. So that's the plan. I hope those of you that are here today, if you get something out of it and want to come back for the others, those are the 2 dates in the next couple of months. They say 10 o'clock Eastern time right now. Megan and I have talked about probably late postponing this till about 11 o'clock so we can get some more people from the West Coast signed up. That's the plan for the 3 parts of this showcase webinar series. So here we are. This is what I want you to get out of today's. Whether or not you're an at-risk user, but in particular if you are, how to set up the dialog box, what settings to use. And it's a pretty involved dialog box to do the distribution fitting. I want you to become familiar with your choices and options through the dialog box. Then I want to give you the stuff that the mechanics of it, the box doesn't help you with. And that's the part that still requires your judgment. I mean, you're not going to blindly follow, I hope, what the answer, in theory, what the answer is coming out of the fit. I hope you will apply some of your own analytical skill judgment to it. And what at-risk will provide you with is 6 different results from goodness of fit tests for the data set. And then there's, in addition to just the straight statistical nature of the fits, there's some judgmental aspects of doing this that involves art and science. And I want to talk you through some of that. So I'm hoping, even though I'm using at-risk as the tool to show this, I'm hoping even the non-at-risk users pick up some things that maybe they'll be able to apply with whatever tool they're using. That's the plan for today. So, I told you I'd worked quite a while at NavAir, not there anymore, but when I was there, I really was, and I'm gonna point the finger at myself and say that some of what I'm doing here is kind of embarrassing to me to even admit in public, but I do recognize from the time I spent doing this that at some point you're going to have a peer, you're going to have maybe some senior technical folks, a tech director or a subject matter expert, and then even occasionally you'll run into somebody in management who wants to get down into the weeds a little bit with you, and they will ask something like, why did you use a fill in the blank distribution like log normal, triangular, to model the given area of uncertainty or risk? Why did you use that distribution to model software growth, whatever it is you're modeling? They may very well, and you should expect, in fact, to be asked that by peers and the senior technical folks. And I have even had Navy PMs, Navy captains ask down in the weed questions about distribution choices for things that were their top risks. So you'd expect them to ask those kind of things. The answers that I've heard other people give, and I'm embarrassed to admit once in a while I've even used, are things like, well, because that's what the analyst before me was using. And I know some of you are going to push back a little bit and go, wait a minute, what's wrong with that? Well, if it's your model now, you need to take ownership for it. This is kind of an excuse that just says, hey, I trusted the person before me. Do some due diligence here and go back and say, well, why were they using that? Maybe they were using it just as a placeholder and it never collected the data to prove whether that was really a good choice or not. So it is an answer, but I'm saying what I'm going to hopefully convince you of is that you can do better than this. Take ownership of the model and the choices like what distribution are being made to work with. Another answer that I've heard and even used, well, that's the distribution that our industry or profession always uses to model fill in the blank. For example, if I was doing an ONS type of estimate and looking at time to failure, time being a continuous variable, I know enough about reliability that if I'm expecting what I'm modeling to be in its flat portion of the bathtub curve, then the industry, the reliability profession says that that should be the exponential distribution you're using to model time to failure. And so some people would stop there and go, well, that's what I'm a reliability engineer. Reliability engineers always use exponential to model time to failure for this part. That's what I'm going with. Well, maybe what you're modeling doesn't quite follow that standard, that default distribution. It's an answer, but it may not be the best you can give. The next one, and I've heard and used this, is, and I'm even going to fill in the blank this time, well, the triangular distribution is the easiest to explain to management. Yes, it is, but don't assume that they can't handle something a little more difficult if it's appropriate. Don't immediately discount their knowledge and be afraid to try and convince them that something they've never heard of might in fact be a better choice there. The triangular we, and I'm saying we as a cost estimator for a long time, often choose the triangular distribution just so that when we have to, if we have to, it's easier to explain. Next one, I plotted the data and it sort of looked like, kind of symmetric, kind of bell-shaped, so I went with the normal. Even though the normal goes up to negative and positive infinity, it just kind of looked normal to me. You can do better than that. And then the last one, the one I hope I've never used, well, that's what the computer told me. The software told me to use it, so I just, boom, black box answer. That's what I picked. Those are some answers you may find yourself having given too. And when I was the SME at NavAir for this area, I didn't let people get away with it. So I just wanted to pass that on to you. Please don't stop with an answer like that. I think a better answer would be what this slide shows. Now, this is a mouthful, but this is a long-winded answer that is better than all of the other ones. So here, somebody says, well, why did you choose that distribution to model the area? I would say, well, because I did exploratory data analysis, made sure that the data was stable, and if there were outliers present, I consciously decided whether to keep them or not. Then I used at-risk to fit distributions to the data. And from those results, I factored in what the 6 different goodness of fit tests were telling me, and I have tests in quotes there for a reason I'll explain later. I've considered the traditional distributions maybe that my profession or background has told me is the right thing to use for this area. I've also considered the characteristics of the data compared to the distributions, like whether that distribution goes to below 0 or not. And then I also, if necessary, might have even done something like truncation of the distribution, which at-risk will allow. And after factoring all of that in, I consciously chose this distribution. And that answer, if you follow it closely, does involve a lot of science, but there is art there as well. There's a lot of judgment. Any questions at this point? Good point to ask questions if you've got any before we move into some
sure
of the
is. Sorry, I was slow on the unmute. Looks like you're still doing good. No questions yet?
All right. Yeah, nothing wrong with questions, but okay, here we go. So I have screenshots of this, and I'm showing you they're here, although I'm not going to spend a lot of time on this, just so you know, if you do download the trial or if you've got it yourself and have never done this, I want you to be able to look back to the screenshots and go, okay, click, 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 and here's what we need to do. But I'm going to show you this live. It's a lot more exciting than just looking at a static shot. But that ribbon at the top is the add-in ribbon for the new version of At-Risk 8.0, which has only been out since late February, early March. So a lot of you may not have seen it. The organization of the ribbon now is much more intuitive than it used to be. The mechanics and the choices, most of it has not changed. I mean, the guts of At-Risk is pretty much the same as it was on the earlier versions. But the organization of the buttons and the fact that they're I think in Windows it's called a split button. A lot of those kind of things have been redone to get it more up to date with current versions of Windows. So under the fit choice, we choose fit as opposed to batch fit or fit manager. And I can talk to those if anybody's interested. But our choice here with univariate data is going to be just to say fit. And then we have 5 tabs to talk through. And the first one is the data tab, and you can see that we've selected continuous sample data. I'm going to show you that for the most part, this is what we're using today, continuous sample data. Part 3 of this webinar series, I'm going to use this choice. When we come back and do this with subjective probability assessment, my question and answer sessions with the experts is going to require me to toggle and choose that last radio button. But other than that, it pretty much follows the same approach. The next tab, distributions, and when we're live, I'll talk you through this as well. But this version of At-Risk has 84, I believe it is, probability distributions available to you. That's a bunch. And it's a lot more than anybody, I think, could probably wrap their brain around. But some of these, you know, the Frechette, for example. What? Where did that come from? You know, maybe you've never heard of it. And if you don't know it, even if it's the best fit, maybe you would say, you know what, if that is the best fit and there's another one closer that I am familiar with, I'm not going to choose the Frechette because I wouldn't want to have to explain it to someone. That might be a choice. That might be part of what you consider. But I would encourage you, especially since there's a really powerful help feature down here, to go in and learn more about these distributions, especially if its fit ends up being significantly better than anything else, whatever's in second place. So just some things to consider. That's the distributions tab. Then we have 3 more to talk through. The other 3 are the bootstrap, and my note here on this one basically says, don't do this the first time through. This is an iterative process. The first time you go through to determine what the best fitting distribution is, leave it unselected. Don't run parametric bootstrapping. Why? Because if you did that for all of the distributions that were checked off on the previous screen, it's going to bog it down quite a bit. So my recommendation ends up being to go through it the first time, make a choice, then come back and rerun the fit with just your chosen distribution, and then run the bootstrapping so that you get the confidence intervals and p-values and things like that. Next tab, chi-square binning. Just at this point, I want to caution you that what At-Risk does by choice, and it's the right thing to do here because it's more mathematically efficient, is to use an equal probability construction of the bins for chi-squared binning. That is a more robust procedure than the way we were all taught to do it, which was equal intervals. So if you think about how to do this, and I'm sure everyone out there has done it by hand, you kind of have to, even in undergraduate prob and stats, you've been taught to do it with equal interval bins. The better way to do it mathematically, although you wouldn't want to do this by hand, is with equal probability bins. So I would recommend that as the choice. Last tab over is results, and I will talk through a little bit about each of these. I also didn't mention this earlier, but I've got in my backup slides considerable amount of detail on the mathematical characteristics of these 6 different ways of testing the fit. I don't want to get, even though this is a deep dive, I don't want to dive too much into the mathematical characteristics, just the judgmental side of kind of a thought process to go through about how to eeny, meeny, miny, mo, what order do I use to consider these. But if you're interested in the math, there are slides in my backup portion of the slide deck that will be made available to you. So 5 different tabs, and I will show you that live when we get to our example. How about now? Any questions yet?
No, sir.
All right. Wow. Plugging along.
They're awed into silence.
Hopefully they're still on. Let me see. Oh, we've got 17 people attending. All right. So the different tests I rattled off a moment ago, and this is in an intentional order. Chi-squared is the oldest of them, probably at this point 110 years or so old, so it's been around quite a while. This is the one that we're all taught to do. You take, whether you're doing the continuous or discrete distribution, you take either the density or the mass function, and you do a formal comparison of the histogram of the data with that PDF or PMF. Now, the problem with the chi-squared, and it is a problem, it's a big issue, is that it's sensitive to how you group your data, the bins, the classes, the intervals that the data is broken into, whatever you've been taught to call those. Excel uses bin. You saw a moment ago that I think interval was the way that interval/bin is how at-risk refers to them, as some textbooks call them classes. That is a conscious decision you as the analyst have to make when you do a chi-square test. I've got a certain number of data points. I'm going to break it into 8 bins, 10 bins, whatever you use. You can, and the unfortunate thing here is you can take the same data set, use one number of bins, get a result that says this distribution is statistically significant, change the number of bins, and suddenly that data set says, no, that's not a good fit, just by changing the number of bins. And that, unfortunately, is something you as the analyst are in charge of. So over the years, mathematicians have come along come up with some rules of thumb for how to pick the number of bins. And I imagine you've all been exposed to the first ones, just the square root of the sample size. And then there's a couple other, and if you Googled it, you'd find many, many others, but they're all just rules of thumb. Okay? And it has to be a whole number too. So a lot of these formulas put you at a point where you round up or round down, and that simple rounding can throw you off of how good the rule of thumb was. So the point I'm trying to make here is chi-squared you've all heard of, you've all used, you've been taught to do it. It's got issues. And over the years, because of that, another pair of mathematicians came along. Kolmogorov and his vodka buddy there, Mr. Smirnov, or Dr. Smirnov probably, said, you know what, if the problem with chi-square goodness of fit testing is the binning, let's stop binning. Well, that makes sense. So what do they do instead? They work with something known as the empirical distribution function, which is just a fancy way of saying arranging the raw data from lowest to highest and assigning a cumulative probability to each point. And there's a number of ways to do that. The simplest of them is just to say that if you had 50 data points, that the minimum then has a 1 in 50 chance of being there or less. The next largest 2 in 50, and you work through your data set that way. There are other variations of doing that, but they're all fundamentally the same kind of idea. Array from lowest to highest your raw data, and then assign a cumulative distribution until you work through the data set. When you have that and plot it or work with it as the values, you've got the empirical distribution function. Well, you then compare that to the distribution function for whatever distribution you're hypothesizing. Normal, Weibull, gamma, triangular, whatever it is. With its parameters, you come up with that distribution function, and you basically overlay them. You do it mathematically, but in essence, in graphical terms, you've done an overlay, and you then look for the largest deviation, and it's a vertical deviation, the miss, the error, if you will, between the plot of the empirical and the hypothesized distribution function. It doesn't require any grouping of the data, which is its positive thing. So that was a big step forward for mathematics, for statistics, to go from binning with its issues in the chi-squared to this one. The problem with it, though, and the reason people didn't stop there, was it only focused on the one largest miss. And if you want to see the math behind that, that's in the backup slides that I hope not to get into, but they're there if anybody asks a deeper question. We can do better than that. And there were all kinds of variations between these two, but the next one was Anderson-Darling came along and said, you know what? KS, good on you guys for working with the empirical distribution, but why did you just focus on the one largest miss? We think you ought to look at every actual data point and compare the errors. In fact, we think you ought to put more weight on what's going on in the tail or tails, depending on whether it's a one or a two-tailed distribution. So that was a big step forward, and the math, of course, because of this weighting, is a little more complicated. But here's the point, at-risk does all three of these. So whatever tool you're using, hopefully it's at least doing all three of these. In the last two versions of at-risk, they've added a couple new things. There we go. So in this last one, average log likelihood was just added with version 8.0. So the version before, 7.5, 7.6, added two information criterion. One of them called the Bayesian information criteria, BIC, the other called the Akaike, and I'm not sure I'm pronouncing that right, but it's a Japanese gentleman, Akaike information criteria, the AIC. And these both use a log likelihood function. Math for these is in the backup slides as well. This one looks at the number of free parameters. And the difference is, and I should have put this in quotes here, but none of these are statistical tests in the sense of hypothesis, a null and an alternative hypothesis, a level of significance. You go through the steps and you make a comparison. These do not do that. They're not tests in the same sense as the three I talked about a moment ago. These give relative measures of the goodness of fit. So you can't look at it and look in a table and go, okay, it's statistically significant. All you can say is, well, this one has the smallest BIC, and it is just so much better than the next one, that let's choose that if you go with BIC. AIC does the same kind of thing as the BIC, but it doesn't, it tends to penalize the number of parameters less strongly. In other words, this is kind of the goodness of fit idea, the degrees of freedom, and this one down here says, wait a minute, let's not be too harsh about how many parameters a distribution is needed. And the reason for that is the BIC was tending to favor the distributions that only needed one or two. This one says, if you're using a beta general, for example, that's 4 parameters. That one was never winning. The AIC was never winning up here because it needed 4 parameters, and we penalized it up here. So AIC, Akaike, chose to not penalize the number of parameters being estimated from the data quite as much. So the two different information criteria, and then in this newest version, and I haven't read a whole lot about this, but it takes the same basic calculation as BIC and AIC, but then only focuses on the values and averages them, as opposed to rolling it up into through a single BIC or AIC score. And this last point is an important one to pay attention to. This is the only one of the 6 tests where it's the largest of the values as opposed to the smallest. So if you're focusing on average log likelihood, you actually would look for the largest. Now, all of that's done for you in at-risk. It's going to bundle them. It's going to rack and stack them according to the criterion that you choose. But I wanted to warn you, if you look at it and go, why is it picking the biggest? Well, that's because the biggest log likelihood average is actually the better fit according to that measure. So that's a lot to get your brain around. I understand that. We aren't even in at-risk yet, but we will be shortly. So here's, if you needed to summarize everything I've said so far, and this is kind of regardless of tool you're using, I would hope that what you do is fit the univariate continuous sample data, and that's specifically what we're talking about here, using the choices. In other words, the way I've shown you in the dialog boxes, or something comparable if you're using a different tool. So I'm not filtering, I'm doing unsure, upper, lower, things like that I'll talk you through live in a moment. Equal probable binning if you have the ability to do that in your tool. Then, if you, like at-risk, have 6 different tests being conducted, you want to look across the results for all 6 tests. And the reason I'm saying that is they rarely agree, all 6 of them picking the same number 1. There's always, I won't say always, but there is usually some discrepancy between the test results. You know, this one says that's number 1 followed by this, and there's a reversal in the next one, and those 2 aren't even in the top 3 in the next test. So there you can potentially get 6 different rankings of the best fit. So you want to look across all of them, but if you don't have a clear winner by doing that, the statisticians I've spoken with have said, pretty much as everybody I've talked to who's statistically more proficient than me, have focused on the AIC and said that's the one, that's the newest state of the art, if you will, on how to do these tests. And so if you've got to break a tie, if you want to pick one to kind of always focus on first, or maybe use as your overall choice criterion, the AIC is the one to go with. I still like looking at all 6 results, but in at risk, I do default to a presentation of AIC first. And the last choice is after you've made the choice back here and decided, okay, this is the one I'm going to use, then go in and run the parametric bootstrapping so you can get p-values and confidence intervals for the 1, 2, 3, 4 parameters, however many have had to be estimated. So with that as a recommended approach, I want to jump and show you something live. It is a set of 50 times to failure, and these are in days. It is for electronic chips that have been tested at 1.5 times their nominal voltage. So it's a time between failures kind of thing. And so the minute I hear the things I just rattled off to you, if I was an analyst getting this information, the things I'm going to think about before I ever start doing any examination of the data is I'm expecting this to be a continuous distribution because it's time, and time is continuous. I'm also expecting to not have any values at or below 0, non-negative values, and maybe a 0 if the minute you turn it on, you know, it pops on you, but nothing negative for sure. I also recognize in the data set that the way it's been described, it's univariate. It's not paired with anything else like the day of the week or you know, the order's not even important. So this isn't a time series kind of presentation. This is just a set of 50. Doesn't matter what order they're presented in, and they're not paired with anything else. So I'm not trying to do any regression type of analysis, nothing explanatory in nature. The third point that I'm thinking about, and this is me because I've had some experience with reliability, is it's time to failure. And the minute I hear that, I'm expecting my experience is telling me that it ought to either be exponential, maybe Weibull. There's 1 or 2 others that might come up, but exponential is the one that I would expect to run into first. That's just the reliability background. So I have that kind of preconceived notion, if you will, in my mind that, hey, I wouldn't be surprised to see it come up exponential or maybe even Weibull. And then the other one, and this is something all of you ought to think about, is there may be outliers in this data set. When I plot it and look at it, there may be points where I go, whoa, wait a minute, what's going on there? With this kind of data, those are relevant points. I could give all kinds of examples of this right here in my home, but there are things that just seem to last forever. And so the data set I'm giving you doesn't have any of what's called in reliability circles censored data. I haven't stopped the test early and cut it off. Everything actually failed. So they're all failures. Some things just are going to look like, whoa, what's going on there? Maybe I should get rid of that point. I'm going to anticipate that there's some like that. And my first cut at it is to say that I'm not throwing it out. That can happen. Okay. So these kind of things are things you should look at before you even look at the data, is what I'm saying. Don't bias your thinking by jumping straight in and letting the math do it for you. Okay? How are we doing on questions? All right.
Feel good. Yeah, sorry.
No problem. So I'm in Excel now. Hopefully everybody can see that on the screen. And I'll blow it up a little bit because the ribbon doesn't get any bigger when I do that, but hopefully you're able to see the kind of red and blue ribbon across the top. At risk, and this is version 8.0, is an add-in to Excel. So I've got all the normal choices I would have in Excel, and this is Excel with 365, Office 365's version of it. And here's the at-risk ribbon. It's been added in. So this is not a standalone package. You see that I've got in column B, time to failure with, and it goes down to row B 54, so 50 data points, and they go out 3 decimal places, which is kind of confirming for us that this is in fact continuous data as opposed to discrete. So some of you would say, well, I probably should go in and do some data analysis and things like that, and that's a perfectly legitimate thing to do. So you do use the Excel features that are available. There's descriptive statistics, there's charts you can plot and things like that. One of the things I owe it to you to show you is that if you've got the entire decision tool suite, which is a choice, I mean, it costs you more to get it, but if you have the entire decision tool suite instead of just at risk, one of those is called Stat Tools. So I thought I would show that to you real quick to show you. It's also an add-in to Excel, and I've just told Excel to go ahead and add it in, and now I have a new ribbon called Stat Tools. I'm gonna do this real quick because it's not what the webinar is about, but I wanted to give you the sense that I do in fact really do what I showed you on that last slide. I'm going to highlight this column, including the title, and the way in Stat Tools to work with it is to say to manage that as a data set. Yes, I want to add this as a data set, and it recognizes these things here. It picked up that it's got the title in the first cell, things like that. One variable, 50 data points. And now what I can do with this is a number of things. I've got summary statistics that I can do, one variable summary, and this is not going to give me much more than what I would have gotten out of Excel's descriptive statistics. But you can see here, mean, the same kind of things that you get out of the descriptive statistics feature. So that's not real convincing to jump in and do that, but you might like this feature. This is a summary graph version of it. I can go in and do a box and whisker plot. Choose the data set that we're working with, identify outliers, sure. And now I've got a box and whisker plot. And you can see, if you're familiar with how the Tukey arrangement of this is, you can see the box itself contains the middle 50. There is a very, very small tail present. 25% of the distribution is packed into that tiny little piece of a whisker right there. And then the upper 25% starts at the right side of the box and shoots out. And these 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 darkened in squares are what exploratory data analysis would refer to as extreme outliers. And it looks like we have 1, 2, maybe 3 of the mild ones that are the squares that aren't filled in. So there are a lot of outliers present in this data set. And I've already told you that I was kind of expecting that because it is reliability data where some things just last longer than others. So I'm not going to, at least in this first cut at it, I'm going to go ahead and just say, hey, it happened. That could happen in real life. I'm not going to eliminate it from the data set. So we'll shrink that one down, go back to our raw data set. And another thing that Stat Tools did, which I kind of like, is it went in and beside the ones that were either extreme or mild outliers, it's identified them for me. Right? So I didn't need to do that, but it was a useful thing to have seen ahead of time with the box and whisker. Could have done histogram, any number of things from Stat Tools. So I thought maybe you'd want to see that. Now to get back to at risk though, here's what we're going to do. I'm going to highlight this data set again. And now in at risk, that's the ribbon we're looking at. Notice that it's what's called a split button here. I've got the upper portion of it, which I can go ahead and click on and it would do what it's defaulted to do, or I can click in the lower portion and get the choices that are in here. There's already a fit in here called define fit time to failure. And so I want to talk you through what I do with a continuous data set for this. So this is the 5 tabs that you would get when you go to do a fit. And I told you when I showed you in the slides that continuous sample data is the choice we're going to make here. Notice that it picked up the title was the name, and there's the range, so it already recognizes that. Values are dates. That's worth pointing out while I've got your attention, because those of you that do schedule risk analysis, maybe you're working with Primavera P6 and are dumping out completion dates, a data field from a simulation run for a schedule risk analysis that is date formatted, then you can take those dates, drop them into at-risk's fit, and say the values are dates, and it will fit a distribution to the dates for completion of an SRA. That can be a very useful thing to you if you're trying to integrate cost and schedule together. If you're doing a schedule as a different package like Primavera or project, and they're getting completion dates for your simulation run of the schedule, you can fit the distribution as dates, come up with the right fit, and drop those right into your cost estimate and work with it that way. So these are kind of my standard choices here. Notice I'm not filtering, although I could. I'm not filtering anything here. There's only 50 points. I've just done the box and whiskers, and I'm okay with the ones that are outliers. So as far as I'm concerned, all 50 are good points. There's no sense to filter it. Next tab, and this is a pretty busy one. Right now, it's telling me the only log normal is checked. I'm going to come in and say select recommended, and this is what the pre-processing of that data set by at risk is telling me are the recommended distributions to go ahead and proceed with. Some of them, just in case you're wondering, why didn't it pick all of them? Well, some of them are really just alternate forms of the other one. Like it didn't need to do a log norm and a log norm 2 because the log norm 2 just has an alternate way of specifying the same log normal. It didn't need to do a fit on those both. It does one and it automatically knows the other is the same, has the same characteristic fit. So I'm okay with that last, with the choice that says select the recommended. I usually just go with that. Some other things to consider here. Suppress questionable fits. Sure, if at-risk recognizes it as a questionable fit, then don't give me the results. Unsure and unsure for lower and upper limit. This is pretty interesting. Watch what happens here. I'm going to toggle down kind of to the middle of the alphabetical listing of distributions. Watch what happens when I say unsure, lower limit, fix it at 0. Did you notice how the list got shorter on the right? I'll go back to unsure. It expands the list. Click on fixed bound at 0. The list got shorter, and in particular, the one I wanted you to notice went away is normal. So any of them that the theoretical distribution goes below 0 have been eliminated from the candidate set of distributions now. And so you might be going, well, of course, I don't want to model anything with the normal distribution because time is continuous and is non-negative. So why would I choose a model that goes below 0? I would argue that maybe you're so far away from the origin, from 0, it might perfectly be normal except for the piece, the small bit of the tail that goes below 0. And by doing this, you're not even going to take that into consideration. What I also am aware of, though, that lets me think that way is that at-risk lets me truncate the distributions, and I'll show you how to do that in a few minutes. So I genuinely, and I'll show you how extreme this can get, if I also fix the upper bound, and it didn't have to be one, I could put anything there, the minute I go to set bounds, I'm only left with these 5 distributions from that entire list of 84. These are the only ones that have an absolute minimum and maximum. So my preference is unsure, unsure, and then use some judgment later if I want to make any tweaks to what it fits. And that's just me. That's my preference. Next tab, bootstrapping. I told you this earlier. I'm going to take it off and not run it the first time through because it slows things down. We'll run it after we make our choice. Chi-square binning. I told you about equal probabilities here. Since I'm using equal probable, this whole lower section is grayed out. If you had gone with equal intervals, then you'd have some more control over what you do with the intervals. My preference, and I really recommend this, is go with equal probabilities. And this is a new tab to this version of at-risk. It lets you, instead of getting the results of all of these and being able to kind of flip back and forth, it will make, it's still going to do all 6 tests, but the way it presents the information will focus on whichever one of these is your preferred way of doing it. And I'll show you how to really get and look at all of them in a moment. We are not doing something called batch fitting, which is if I had multiple columns in here and just wanted in all one fell swoop to test everything, that's what's called batch fitting. The problem with that is that it limits. If you want to do one test and focus on AIC and another one you wanted to focus on Anderson-Darling, you'd have to work a little bit harder later on to do it. Batch fit kind of treats them all the same, but this is a single column, so batch fit's not even an option here. Everybody with me so far? Any questions?
There is a question I was hoping to grab you before you move to the next topic.
Okay.
John, are you ready to ask your question? John,
yeah, sure. Hey, Steve, how you doing?
Hi, John.
Hey, so I'm not familiar with the stat tool, so this a little far away from where you were over there. For added fidelity into that stat tools add-on, are you able to go in and manipulate any of your constraints? So, for example, you showed a box and whisker plot. If I go in there and readjust my gates, so for example, if I only wanted to consider extreme outliers, 2 IQRs above where my 75th percentile was, for example, could I go and adjust that?
I don't believe so. I've never even thought about that, because I mean it's not eliminating them, and it's just identifying them.
Right.
So
right.
if I wanted to use no, I hear what you're saying. It uses the standard Tukey, all the way back to the 60s, I think. Tukey put this together. So the interquartile range, the metric it's using, the 1.5 and the 3 for deciding between mild and extreme outliers. And I think that's probably, I'd have to look deeper, but I'm nearly certain that it does not let you change that. But I mean, that's easy enough to do, because if you've done the descriptive statistics, you've got the quartile values. You can go in and do a quick conditional formatting or whatever you want based on that approach. So, if Megan can give me your email address, I'll look into it more, since you probably don't have access to it. But I'm nearly certain it does not let you give you that kind of control over it. It has a built-in metric.
Okay, yeah, no worries. That was just my big question for it. Thank you.
What are you used to using, by the way? Did you just go with the standard yourself, or do you typically change the benchmarks metric?
Well, you see, when with discerning outliers, that's kind of a bit of a debate. If I understand fully how the data was collected, to the extent that I could replicate that data under similar circumstances, then I maybe would be more inclined to kick out some outliers. But if I'm getting a raw data set over time that I don't really know how it was, all I can really be for sure is that it happened. So if it happened, keep it in. And I probably wouldn't want to get rid of data so readily. That's a big thing with data analytics, is how we're going to take care of outliers, because it happened, especially in some of our programs. What happened, and if we understand fully why that outlier occurred, you've got to keep it in.
And that's completely consistent with the way I've been teaching analysts to do it for years. This is nice for identifying things that the standard approach would call. You're still in control of whether you keep it or not, whether it's mild, extreme. I mean, you're in complete control of what you discard or keep. And so, it's just a little bit more information to go on. But the truth is, as a risk analyst, not only do the outliers that I keep appear to me to be the most important points, those are the ones I really want to study the most, because that's how I can help the program the most. Hey, this happened to another program, and you're going to look at it and go, whoa, that'll never happen to us. So I want to be prepared to say, yes, it very well could. You know, here's what happened to them. And if you don't want it to happen to you, I mean, I'm going to leave it in my analysis because you haven't convinced me yet, Mr. Program Manager, that you're doing anything that would prevent that. So the value I can add is to point it out to them, not just discard it and, do kind of the Pollyanna approach. I want to learn what happened there, include it in my analysis, and if they try to push back, that's a learning point for them. That's how I can add value to all of this. So,
right.
Awesome question. All right, so with all the dialog boxes filled out the way we did, and I should have made more of a big deal about it, but it just ran the 6 different goodness of fit tests on all of the distributions we had checked off in there. And notice up in this upper left section of the dialog box, it says AIC. That's what it's using to rank them right now. And in this version of at risk, I can't change that in that section. I used to be able to click on the drop down and say, well, let's see what BIC said. Let's see what chi-squared said. This one, because of the choice I made in the earlier dialog box, is giving them to me ranked by AIC. And so you see log normal show up at the top here. In red is the hypothesized distribution. In blue is the raw data itself. I'm followed pretty closely by inverse Gaussian, then something called Levi, Pearson 5. Then there's a big jump in these values, and these are relative measures, remember. There's a big jump in values between Pearson 5 and the one I kind of thought was going to win, which was the exponential. So based just on AIC, I would feel comfortable choosing any of those first 4, since they're all kind of close in terms of the relative measure. So now you start factoring in other things like which of these could I explain? The log normal, maybe you're using in other places and you've already got them accustomed to thinking that way. And I know the Air Force in particular loves their log normal distributions. So there may be some of those considerations. I don't know if you can see it. In fact, I think you can't, but as I mouse over these, did you see a box show up that says risk log normal, and it gives you in bold some parameters, and then underneath it ranks them? Do you see that?
We sure do.
You do? Awesome. Because I looked at a recording of me doing this a couple months ago, and that didn't show up, but I'm glad you can see it. But while I'm on one and moused over it, you can see that for the log normal, AIC, you can see the score it gives it, BIC. So according to these 6 tests, it came in number 1 for everything except the chi-squared. And that, under chi-squared, it came in at number 2. So in my mind, that would be a pretty clear indication that log normal is the best choice here. But there's something else kind of squirrely going on. Look at the syntax in the heading of this, or look at what the mouse over is presenting. If you're not working with that risk routinely, you don't know what it's giving you, but it's giving you the parameters for the log normal. The first 2 parameters are the 23.773, which is probably its mean, followed by, I imagine, its standard deviation. So those 2 parameters are necessary to specify the log normal. Then it does something that I believe at risk is the only one of the tools available to do this. And I could be wrong. It's been a while since I looked at Crystal Ball or CoStat or any of the others. But at risk also is able to do a shift. And the fit that it's giving us that ranks log normal with these parameters as best includes that shift parameter. So let's talk about what that's doing, because it happened here. It's not just that you're saying, I'm choosing the log normal. You're choosing a very specific log normal if you go with this one. And if you look off to the descriptive statistics on the side of it, I know that's a little tough to see. Yeah, I don't know how much of this you're able to get with the go-to meeting bar that's on the side of my screen, but hopefully that's large enough for you to see. In red is what the log normal is that we are focusing on for the moment. And notice how it's giving me a minimum of negative 0.00477. What? The log normal starts at 0 and goes to positive infinity. How can it have a minimum of less than 0? That's what the shift did for it. So if you remember when I showed the box and whisker, there was a very tiny whisker, 25% packed in real small. That was all happening around 0. So what at risk identified was, in order to get the best log normal fit to this, it had to kick the distribution a little bit below 0. So how significant is that, you might ask? How much of the distribution is actually below zero? The answer is right here in the graphic, 0.2%. And so, yeah, some of you would say, well, wait a minute, it's going to give me a distribution that can go below zero. That's nonsense. This is time. I'm not going to choose that distribution. And you might be able to make that argument. I would say something different. I would say as it's presented, it is the best fitting distribution, and only 0.2% go below zero. And to prevent that from happening, I'll choose it and then truncate it back at zero. And I'll show you how to do that. Okay? So that was what I'm trying to give you some of that judgmental thing too. It's not blindly choosing what it says. Another thing I could do here, if you're not comfortable with that mouse over and want to see it presented a little differently, there's a button here that gives me a statistical summary along with a little thumbnail graph of all of the different fits. And I can see by AIC left to right, 1, 2, 3, 4, it's giving me the ranking of the different distributions. And you can see here for the one that it's recommending, there is another repeat of 1, 1, 1, you know, that it came in with all of those. So the next one question to ask would be, well, if chi-squared identified it as number 2, what did it think was number 1? Well, it's right next door to it. It liked the inverse Gaussian better. And the inverse Gaussian came in number 222, and then number 3 for the KS and the Anderson-Darling. So that's a little bit more confirmation to me that you know, log normal seems to be the way to go. So there's a whole bunch of information here. What it doesn't have is p-values and confidence interval information, but there's a lot to go on here that you could use to help you make that decision and choose between the 6 different rankings. And if you look further into the list, you do see how they bounce quite a bit. There's some 7s and 11s and 13s in there for the PERT, okay, which is a popular distribution. So you're gonna, you know, they aren't necessarily gonna all come in. This is a strong indication that log normal, at least statistically, could be the best fit. So with that in mind, what would the next step be? Well, let's do it. The next step in all of this is to say, go back to here where you can see it, write to Excel. And it's asking me, you know, just how did you make this decision? Just a couple standard things here. And I'll go ahead and pop it into a cell over here, say okay. And in that cell now, I want everybody to, who, especially if you're not an at-risk user, to kind of pay attention to everything in that cell. The syntax for it has all been dropped in there automatically. I didn't have to put any of this in there. It even knows time to failure is the name. It's log normal. There's its parameters, including that shift. Okay? So all of that happened. Something else I want to show you, while I'm in here, this is at risk, it's a simulation tool. So ultimately I'm going to want to include that cell in some calculations probably. When it's included, I'll put the dice on so you can see, that cell is now a live cell. It's a random variable that every time I recalculate the spreadsheet with F9, you're seeing another sampled value show up in that cell to be used for calculations downstream. And then what it's giving me are randomly sampled time to failures in days, because that's what I've modeled. Unfortunately, and I'm not going to sit here and do it enough because 0.2% of the time may take me a while to get there, but I have to also acknowledge that that can go below zero, and I don't want it to. The way to do that in at-risk is to come back over to the distribution. You see a graph of what it's choosing, you see the parameters again, and you see this shift. There is some buttons here telling me there's more features that you can use under parameters, and this is how you go in and truncate. Okay, so I could go in and say, I want to truncate after the shift, and it's now giving me another bit of control. So it's kind of like John's question about controls for the outlier determination. This one's letting me control where to do the truncation. So I would pop a 0 in there, and the minute I do that, that's now been added to what the distribution sampling will proceed as. And the way that I know that that's going to happen is look over to the right to the statistical side of this now, and you see that the new minimum of this is not negative 0.04 or whatever anymore, it's a 0. So there's nothing going to be allowed to be presented in that cell below 0 because I've just truncated the distribution there. So if you're okay with it like that, say okay, and now that cell will never provide a value below 0. The last thing I want to show you, and we'll call it a day, I'm going to go back into Fit. I'm going to go to the Fit Manager. Since I've already used the data set, what I want to do with that same data set, I don't have to re-specify it all, but I want to go into it and say, create a new standard fit. And let me cancel back out of that and keep a little bit more of it than I had a minute ago. We'll go to the Fit Manager, choose that and just say, go to selected fit. And so everything I'd given it before is still there, but this time I'm going to go down and unselect everything except the one log normal. Click on that log normal. It's the only one present now. Now I'm going to say bootstrapping. It's going to do 1,000 resamples using a 95% confidence level. Say OK. Bootstrapping's been conducted just for this one. You see the same AIC value presented here, but now what you're getting in addition is a whole lot more information down in here than was there before. Critical values, p-values, confidence intervals, everything you want to know about that particular log normal that showed up as the best fit according to AIC. So that's how the bootstrapping would be done. Okay. Any questions about my demonstration?
John's was the last question that we got. So
okay.
With it being 11:01, we'll call it for today, but it sounds like you stopped at a pretty good point to encourage everybody to come back next month.
Well,
so we'll look
I'm
forward.
going to, I'll say again that these slides and the data set I'll make available to you so you can, whatever tool you use, you can do it as a comparison, but please go to the Palisade website. If you have questions in particular about the pricing and things like that, there's an email address there for you. And once again, here are the 2 dates for the future, and they'll probably be at 11 o'clock instead of 10 for you. And I said I had backups of the slides and the data set I'm going to make available, and shoot those to Megan shortly.
Mm-hmm. And if for whatever reason anybody has misplaced Steve's contact info, you can just email the ICA office and we'll connect you to him. So until then, thank you, Steve. Thank you, everybody, for tuning in. Have a great day. Stay safe, stay sane, stay healthy, be good, and we'll hear from you next month.
Thank you for your attention, everyone.
Thank you.